On this video, you're going to learn about the status screen. The status screen has a lot of information that we provide within the software. So let's go to status and let's go to the submenu status. By default, we show all the version information. So here's a link to the version history that's shown on our website. So you can see the version history, everything that is delivered with each version, features, enhancements, bugs, fixes, all that's available for every single version we have ever put out of FlowWright. You can also check for your upgrade. If you have a valid license, this will come back and tell you whether you qualify for the upgrade. So there are no upgrades available currently since I am in 9.6. You can also look at the upgrade instructions. So this will navigate to the upgrade instructions on our dev site. Next, you can see the licensing information. With licensing information, you also have access to the end user licensing agreement. Just click on this and it will open up the EULA document. As you can see, we have all the licensing information, type of license, expiration, number of users, all that. You can also, if you get a new licensing file from us, you can upload that license file and you can update your licensing. You can click on this button and send your license file to FlowWright support if there are any issues. You can also update licensing from our server. And in this particular one here, you can actually execute a single-use code. Sometimes we issue single-use codes to either to extend the license or to increase the number of users. And these single-use codes can be executed right here. Next, we're going to look at culture. By default, it's set to the US culture, US English. If you are in a different country like Australia, you can go in here and change to ENAU, which is the Australian English. So you can see that if I go to the top of this list, you will see that ENAU, English Australia. And once you make this change, you want to make sure that your SQL Server account is also set to Australian English or British English. That way, all the dates are computed the correct way. So there won't be any issues when our application is talking to the database server or to the database. The next thing is the database itself. So here you can see which connection string is being used for the UI and for the engines, and also the connection string that's being used for the REST API also. Next are the services. Currently, FlowWright has 6 different engines that power FlowWright. So you have the actual main workflow service itself, which is the FlowWright engine service. Then we have the FlowWright ESB service, which is the enterprise service bus for processing events. We have an archival service for processing archival of workflow instances, events, and forms. Then we also have statistics service that collects statistics. Then we also have a FlowWright trigger service for triggering workflows. Then we also have the FlowWright email service, which is our background sending email service. And those are the engines. As you can see, the little animation on this little icon shows that this service is currently running. And if your .NET application or FlowWright is configured with an account that's able to control services, then right from here you can start the service. You can start the service. As you can see, these services are not started yet, and you can see that the start button is available, but only if your IIS account for the site has permission to start services that you'll be able to use this feature. Next is the cache. Within FlowWright, we use different caches to speed up things, and this is what we call a configuration cache. In the configuration cache, you can see the highest number of items is the number of steps, and next being configuration settings. So there are different pieces of information that's being cached for easy access and also for performance. Also, you can also clear the cache anytime. You can clear the settings cache. You can generate the cache. You can download the cache file, which we download as an XML file. Next is the request queue. This request queue is showing you number of engine alerts that are waiting to be processed and also have been already processed. So in my case, in this case, there's 65 that's already processed and there's 0 waiting to be processed. And you can also click on this button and actually view the actual engine alerts also. So you can see all open or closed, and you will see where the engine alerts came from. I'm just going to go back into status, and we've covered this particular menu. Next is the settings. Under settings, we have email configuration. So this is where you would provide your email server configuration. So here's the SMTP server, the what port to use, username and password to use, whether to use SSL or not. And you can also click on this button to send a test email message. And if everything is successful, you will see that message sent successfully. There are also a couple of other settings here also. If you want to send out open task notifications, you can turn on that feature right here. You can also send out expired task notifications to users by turning on this feature here also. Next is UI control. Since I'm logged in as an admin user, I have access to all these settings. But with UI control, you can actually control what the regular user would see. So in this case, if you don't want, let's say, regular users to have access to workflow definitions or instances, you can just turn them off and save the settings. And at that point, when a regular user logs in, they'll never see this particular menu at all. Okay. Also, a couple of other different settings. You can also reorder the tabs within the workflow definitions, how they appear. You can change their order. You can actually drag them and change the order, so you can see last 10 created first and then last 10 updated. Or you can have the same order. You can also turn off. Let's say you don't want to see last 10 created. You can actually turn these things off and save these, and you will not see these settings or these tabs within the UI. Same thing for the instance tabs. You can do the same thing for the instances also. The next thing under settings is workflow designer settings. In the workflow designer, these are all the different types of step categories, and you can turn some of these categories off for regular users or for non-admin users. So in this particular case, you can see the file system steps are not shown to the regular user. Then there's also the workflow autosave settings. In this case, you can turn on autosave for a workflow designer, and then you can also tell how often. So in this case, every 30 seconds, if the workflow designer detects there are any changes, it will automatically save the workflow definition back to the server. You can also set some connection defaults. You can tell what the line size is going to be, the thickness of the line. You can also set the default color of the line. So whenever you draw a connection, it will use this line thickness and the line color to draw that particular connection. You can also turn on a few other settings. You can hide all steps. You can also say how it should be displayed, whether it's collapsed or whether it's shown. Same thing for the template steps. You can also show and hide my template steps and all template steps. And there are also delimiter configuration. So currently we use the pipe and the tilde to separate rows and columns. If you have let's say you're in a HL7 environment where the pipe is already used and you want to use a different character, then you can easily come here and change the row and column separators. And same thing for business objects also. You can change the different name separator and type separator uh, for delimiters for business objects also. The next thing we're going to look at is archival. Archival have many settings, and you have granular control over how you want to archive and what you want to archive. So for example, completed workflow instances, you can have those, it has their own settings. So you can say every hour, anything that's older than 1 hour, go ahead and automatically archive. And for example, you can have a different number here for errored instances. You can say anything that's older than 30 days. So keep them for 30 days and then archive. Aborted instances, same. This is kept for 1 day. Form instances, if you have a 0, that means not to archive. Same thing for events. And then also, once things are archived, you can also have these things automatically removed. So let's say a workflow gets archived, every hour once this finishes or once it completes execution. Then you can keep that workflow for the next 6 months or 2 years in the application database. And then you can say, well, after 2 years, I don't need that workflow definition or the workflow instance. You can have that workflow instance completely removed, everything associated, all the data, everything removed from the application based on this configuration setting. The next is the configuration. This configuration has a lot of different information that you can control within the application. So you can see that one of these, the application settings, you can see the image file path that's being used. You can see the application URL. If FlowWright is going on a public domain, you might want to include the domain /cdev workflow. If it's under SSL, you might want to change this to HTTPS. The system user account here is the system account that you want FlowWright to act as. So whenever the engine runs at, this account will be used, and this account will be used for executing that particular workflow or event or anything. Next is a background process cutoff. So what this means is, let's say, for example, if there are 1,000 workflow instances, and from the UI you ask the 1,000 instances to be removed or deleted. Instead of the UI waiting for until all the 1,000 instances are removed, using this background cutoff, what the UI will do is it will put that to run as a background process. So the UI will immediately come back so that you can do other things, but a background process will be running that particular functionality to remove those workflow instances while you're doing other stuff. The application culture, as I showed before, this is the setting, ENUS as the default. Display header means this particular menu at the top, and the sidebar, this can be also turned off. Server timeout time zone offset. This setting is used especially in tasks. This is a time zone offset from 0. East coast of US, this is 4 hours ahead of UTC time. So given that, we have a value of 4, but this can be adjusted based on wherever you are in the world. Email support address. So in this case, we have support@flowwright.com. And the last item here being number of history items to keep. When history is cleared out, this tells to keep the last 10 entries of history and remove everything else. Under this list, there are also other settings. So for example, delimiter settings, what not allowed delimiters are. So you could never use percent as a delimiter. There are engine settings. These engine settings are interesting because you can actually make our engines function however you want. So in this case, there's an artificial wait time, which is 10,000. And basically what that says is, if a workflow executes 10,000 steps consecutively, then have the workflow automatically go into artificial wait. And that artificial wait could be some kind of an interval, maybe wait for like 5 minutes or whatever amount of time. Okay. And this would be, in this case, this is actually the wait time, how long to wait on the artificial wait. And in this particular case, we have, engine long running step cutoff, which is number of steps after it executes. So in this case, after 1,000 steps, it will use this value to wait for that amount of time. The next is the CDF workflow engine service interval. This is how often to launch child processes. So we have child processes or robotic workers that do the work on workflow instances. And this is telling to launch every 500 milliseconds or every half a second. This says how many engine processes to launch. So if you have an environment where you have great resources, with lots of CPU power and lots of RAM, then you can increase this to be, whatever the number you want, whether it could be 20, 50, even 100 child processes. And also, how quick you want things to be processed. If you have a, much lower, not powerful environment, you might want to bring these values down to like maybe 5 child processes, and then maybe to like every 1 second or every 5 seconds to launch child processes. All that can be controlled here. And if there is no work to be done, there's no point checking every half a second for work. So what you can do is tell the engine, hey, go back to a 1 second, check only if there's any work to be done every second. And that way we also reduce network chatter within our application and the database. And you can have the same settings for the enterprise service bus also, so you can control these settings. And you can also check how often to check for emails. Here you can send emails every 5 seconds, and also control the retry period. The next is there are settings for logly. So here you can provide your logly API key, and you can also provide your logly URL for logging entries. You can look at your master globals. You can say auto update definition master globals. Here is true or false. And same thing for master variables, whether you want auto updation of master variables. Here you also have security protocol. So in this case, I've just put into some values so it can be used, but otherwise default values will be used. There are Slack settings, so where you can provide the Slack API token and also the Slack message URL. These will be used by the Slack steps. There are task settings, things like default values or labels for the approval button and for the reject button, and also the task redirect URL once the task is completed. There's also Twilio settings, where you can give Twilio account ID, auth token, all this information. So that is it for configuration settings. And next thing you will see is under settings is cleanup. Just as data grows with almost every application, these are the types of things that can grow: history, error log, engine alerts, emails, temporary images. So you can configure all this so that they will be removed automatically. In order for the cleanup to run, the statistical service needs to be up and running. Just like for archival to work, the archive engine service needs to be running. The next is events. So as you know, FlowWright can also generate events when certain things happen. And the events are broken up into workflow and forms. So for example, if I go into events and look at workflow events, right now the events are turned on, all of them. Actually, they're all turned off. If I want to turn all of them on, click on this button and it will turn all of them on. I'm just going to off it for now. And you can turn on individual events on. So for example, if you want to, let's say, do something when an instance completes. So if you look at this list of different events, you can see that instance finished executing. You can turn this on and make sure there's an event handler acting on this event in the enterprise service bus. And whenever a workflow finishes executing, you will be sent a notification, or whatever the event handler is supposed to do will be executed. Similar events are available for forms also. So for example, when a form definition gets created, if you want to, let's say, have an event being generated, you can turn this event on and have an event handler hooked up to that particular form definition created, and have, when that event happens, it will fire that event and the event engine will process that event. Next thing is utilities. We have a BI compute. There are some business intelligence compute reports where you can actually pick the workflow definition, and same thing for instances, and select which ones to be automatically computed for reporting. And you can also set the interval, how often these to be computed, and make sure the statistical service is running for these computations to happen automatically. There are also system dashboards that are provided. There's a user dashboard and an admin dashboard. These are dashboards that the user will see by default. In this case, I have turned this one off, so I can actually turn on this. I'm just going to keep it turned off. You can update them, you can remove them, but you can also manage these from the dashboard screen also. The next thing is the upgrade, the version upgrades. The version upgrades will take a little bit of time to load because it's doing a lot of computations. So once this comes up, you will see that you can click this button to update any of the default values. If there are any database changes, you will see a button here to apply database changes. And typically the database changes are, let's say we ship out a new version. In that new version, we might have added new columns to existing tables, or we might have added new tables with new functionality. Those tables now need to be added to your own, FlowWright database. So applying these database changes will automatically add those tables and columns into your database. The next is configuration changes. There are many different types of configuration changes. So for example, in the new version, we might have created some new data types or some new steps. Most times with every version, we try to put out some new steps. We might have new business objects, events, event definitions, dashboard widgets, form widgets, any configuration settings, and any globalization changes and new roles and things like that. So what you can do is you can review these changes right here within this UI and click update to automatically update your environment with these new settings. So this is a complete overview of the status screen. You might want to look at some of the other videos that go more into the details in some of this functionality.